When I moved into this neighborhood, I was looking for peace and quiet after years of serving in the military. Instead, I found HOA tyranny in the form of Karen Witman, a woman who had turned homeowner rules into a personal dictatorship. At first, she tried to control the small things. My car, my yard, my trees. Nothing was saved from her clipboard and constant complaints. But when I put up an American flag, a flag I fought to defend, Karen took things too far. She ripped it down and smugly told me it was against HOA regulations. She thought she had won. She had no idea who she was dealing with. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It didn't take long for me to realize that something was off. Beneath the surface of this picturesque community lay an unspoken tension, a sense of control that loomed over everyone. A few neighbors greeted me warmly when I arrived, but quickly warned me about Karen, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA. At the time, I dismissed their warnings, thinking they were exaggerating, but soon enough, I understood what they meant. Not long after moving in, I found a notice taped firmly to my front door. The bold letters spelled out strict HOA regulations: no parking in front of the house past 9 p.m., limits on how long vehicles could stay outside, and restrictions on planting anything other than HOA-approved flora. I crumpled the paper in frustration and tossed it into the trash. Ridiculous! I muttered under my breath. Little did I know this was just the beginning. The next day, as I bent down to pick up a package from my porch, I noticed someone watching me. Looking up, I saw Karen, a middle-aged woman with tightly pulled-back blonde hair, arms crossed, exuding arrogance and disapproval. She wasted no time introducing herself or explaining the rules. Instead, she launched into a sharp critique of my car parked neatly in my driveway and demanded I remove an old tree in my yard. Her tone was condescending, her demeanor intimidating. But I wasn't about to let her dictate how I lived in my own home. This was only the start of our confrontation, a clash between authority and individual rights that would ultimately lead to her downfall. From the moment I encountered Karen, the HOA president, it was clear that she wasn't just enforcing rules. She was wielding power with an iron fist. Her first visit to my home set the tone for everything that followed. She stood in my front yard, arms crossed, her blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun, exuding arrogance and disapproval. Before she even spoke, I greeted her politely, but she didn't bother with pleasantries. Instead, she launched into a tirade about how my car, neatly parked in my own driveway, was ruining the neighborhood's aesthetics. Then, without missing a beat, she pointed at the old tree in my yard and demanded I remove it because it was on the HOA-approved list. I couldn't believe. What I was hearing was my car ruining the neighborhood, and the tree, a living thing that had been there long before I arrived, was now suddenly a problem. It felt absurd, like I'd stepped into some alternate reality where common sense no longer applied. I tried to stay calm, reminding myself that this was my property, and I had every right to make decisions about it. But Karen wasn't interested in reason or fairness. To her, I was simply another resident who needed to fall in line. Things escalated when I decided to hang an American flag outside my house. For me, the flag wasn't just a symbol. It represented years of service, sacrifice, and the ideals I had fought to protect during my time in the military. As I stood back to admire it waving proudly in the breeze, I felt a deep sense of pride. But less than a minute later, Karen came pounding on my door, clutching a piece of paper and accusing me of violating HOA regulations, Section 13.5. She declared smugly that it prohibited political or religious symbols. I stared at her in disbelief. The American flag political? When I challenged her authority, explaining that federal law protected my right to display the flag, she doubled down. The HOA is mandatory, she snapped, insisting I take it down or face fines. Her stubbornness only fueled my resolve. This wasn't just about the flag anymore. It was about standing up to someone who believed her rules were above the law. Karen's behavior became increasingly aggressive. She sent official warning letters, spread rumors among neighbors, and even tried to isolate me socially. Some residents avoided me altogether, fearing they'd become her next target if they showed support. Yet despite her efforts to intimidate me, I refused to back down. I knew the law was on my side, and more importantly, I knew I was doing the right thing. Every time Karen confronted me, her voice sharp and condescending, I reminded myself of one truth. Tyrants always fall eventually. Little did she know her downfall was closer than she imagined. The confrontation with Karen escalated quickly after she reported me to the police, convinced that her HOA rules could override federal law. I'll admit, seeing a patrol car pull up in front of my house sent a chill through the air, but I wasn't worried. I knew I was in the right. As the officer stepped out of their vehicle, Karen practically sprinted toward them, her arms flailing and her voice shrill as she pointed at me like I was some kind of criminal. "It's him," she declared, her tone dripping with self-righteous indignation. "He deliberately defies the HOA regulations. I've warned him multiple times." I stood calmly by my porch, setting down the watering can I'd been using. This was Karen's moment to shine, or so she thought. But little did she know I had prepared for this showdown. The officers exchanged glances before one of them, clearly the senior officer, asked who had made the complaint. Karen puffed out her chest. Placing her hand, with her hands on her hips, she announced smugly, "I represent the HOA, and I have sufficient evidence to prove he is in violation." Her confidence was almost amusing. Once inside my house, surrounded by curious neighbors eager for gossip, I reached into my pocket and pulled out something that would change the dynamic entirely. My military badge. The officer's demeanor shifted instantly. One of them straightened up, his expression now filled with respect. He furrowed his brows and turned to Karen. "Do you even know who this man is?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Karen faltered, stammering as she tried to defend herself. "Whoever he is, he still has to follow HOA rules." But the officer wasn't having it. He took out his phone and read aloud from a legal document. According to federal law, no organization can prohibit the display of the American flag on private property. Preventing or penalizing this act is a violation of federal law. Silence fell over the room. Karen's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she struggled to find an excuse. But the worst part for her came next. The officer revealed that I wasn't just any veteran. I was a Medal of Honor recipient, which granted me additional legal protections. "You have just committed a federal offense by harassing a veteran," the officer said sternly. Murmurs erupted among the residents, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. Karen's bravado crumbled completely. She stammered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't know." It was pathetic, really. The officer informed her that she would face consequences, including a formal hearing and a public apology to me. That day marked the beginning of Karen's downfall. Humiliated and exposed, she lost not only her authority, but also the respect of the community. Justice had prevailed, and I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction as I raised the American flag once more, its colors fluttering proudly in the morning breeze. The community's reaction to my confrontation with Karen was a mix of fear, curiosity, and eventual support. At first, when Karen began her campaign against me, many of my neighbors distanced themselves. They avoided eye contact or quickened their pace when passing by my house, clearly afraid of becoming collateral damage in Karen's vendetta. Some even whispered behind my back, likely repeating the rumors Karen had spread about me being a troublemaker who refused to follow HOA rules. It was frustrating, but I understood their hesitation. Karen had a reputation for punishing anyone who crossed her, and no one wanted to risk becoming her next target. Despite their avoidance, I could see the unease in their eyes. Many residents seemed uncomfortable with Karen's behavior, but felt powerless to challenge her authority. She had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist for years, and her word was treated as law, even when she publicly humiliated people over minor infractions like planting unapproved flowers or leaving garbage bins out. It was too long. No one dared to speak up. So when I stood my ground and refused to back down, it created a ripple effect. Neighbors began watching the situation closely, some secretly hoping I would succeed in taking her down. The turning point came during the day the police arrived at my house. Curiosity drew a small crowd of residents eager to see how the drama would unfold. When the officers revealed that I was not only a veteran, but also a Medal of Honor recipient protected by federal law, the atmosphere shifted. Murmurs spread to the group as they realized the extent of Karen's overreach. One neighbor muttered, "We're witnessing history here," while another pulled out their phone to record the moment. For the first time, Karen looked vulnerable, her confidence crumbling under the weight of legal consequences. After the incident, the tide turned in my favor. Residents started approaching me cautiously, offering quiet words of encouragement. A few admitted they'd always disliked Karen's authoritarian ways, but were too afraid to act. The final blow came during the HOA meeting to vote on Karen's removal. Nearly every hand shot up in agreement to oust her, and the anger in their eyes said it all. They were tired of living under her oppressive regime. As Karen left the meeting room defeated and humiliated, I saw a sense of relief wash over the community. In the days that followed, several neighbors thanked me for standing up to her. They confessed that they had lived in fear for far too long and admired my courage. While I didn't seek recognition, seeing the neighborhood reclaim its peace and freedom made everything worth it. Justice had been served, and the community finally felt like a place where people could live without tyranny looming over them. This entire ordeal with Karen taught me a lot about justice, power, and the delicate balance between authority and individual rights. At its core, this wasn't just a dispute over HOA rules or an American flag. It was a clash of principles. Karen represented the misuse of power, someone who believed her position as HOA president gave her unchecked control over others' lives. She thrived on fear, using intimidation and manipulation to enforce her will. But what she failed to understand was that true power doesn't come from titles or regulations. It comes from fairness, respect, and accountability. For me, this fight became deeply personal because it wasn't just about my property. It was about standing up for what's right. As a veteran, I've always believed in protecting freedom, whether on the battlefield or within my own community. When Karen tried to strip away my right to display the American flag, a symbol of everything I had fought for, I saw it as an attack not only on me but also on the values I hold dear. Her actions reminded me of tyrants throughout history who abused their authority, believing they are above the law. And like those tyrants, she ultimately fell when confronted. What struck me most was how her downfall brought the neighborhood together. For years, residents lived under her oppressive regime, too afraid to challenge her. But once I stood firm and exposed her violations of federal law, people found the courage to unite against her. The vote to remove her from office wasn't just a rejection of her leadership. It was a collective declaration that no one is above justice. Watching my neighbors stand up for themselves after years of silence filled me with pride. It proved that even in the face of tyranny, ordinary people can reclaim their power if they're willing to fight for it. In the end, this experience reinforced my belief that justice always prevails, though it often requires patience and perseverance. Power misuse may seem invincible at first, but it crumbles when met with unwavering determination. As I look around my neighborhood now, peaceful and free from Karen's shadow, I'm reminded that communities thrive not through domination, but through mutual respect and shared values. That's the kind of power worth fighting for and preserving. In the end, Karen's downfall was as swift and dramatic as her rise to power had been years earlier. The once feared HOA president, who had ruled our neighborhood with an iron fist, was reduced to nothing more than a cautionary tale. Her departure from the community was marked by silence. No fanfare, no goodbyes, just a quiet hum of indifference from neighbors who had endured her tyranny for far too long. As I watched her pull her suitcase toward her car on that overcast morning, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: satisfaction, relief, and even a tinge of pity. But above all, what stood out most was the overwhelming sense that justice had finally been served. Karen's final moments in the neighborhood were telling. She glanced around, perhaps hoping someone would step forward to offer a word of support or even acknowledgement, but no one did. The same resident she had intimidated, fined, and manipulated now stood at a distance, watching silently as she loaded her belongings into her car. When her eyes met mine, I saw a flicker of bitterness, anger, and something else: helplessness. For the first time, she looked like a woman stripped of her armor, vulnerable and defeated. It was a stark contrast to the arrogant, domineering figure who had pounded on my door, demanding I take down the American flag. As her car disappeared down the street, I turned back to my porch and raised the flag once again, its colors vibrant against the gray sky. A neighbor approached me, his hands tucked into his pockets, and asked, "Do you feel sorry for her?" I paused for a moment, considering the question. Did I? Karen had caused so much pain and division within the community, using fear and control to maintain her authority. Yet seeing her leave in such isolation made me realize how lonely and hollow her pursuit of power must have been. Still, I shook my head and replied, "No, I only see that justice has finally been served." The days following Karen's departure brought a noticeable change to the neighborhood. Residents began speaking more freely, sharing stories of how they had suffered under her rule. Fines for minor infractions, public shaming during HOA meetings, and constant scrutiny over their personal choices. Some admitted they had lived in fear for years, too afraid to challenge her. Now, with her gone, there was a renewed sense of freedom and camaraderie. People started decorating their homes, planting flowers, and hosting gatherings without worrying about arbitrary rules. The oppressive cloud that had hung over us for so long had finally lifted. Reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized this wasn't just a victory for me. It was a triumph for the entire community. By standing up to Karen, I had shown others that it was possible to resist tyranny, even when it seemed insurmountable. Together, we had reclaimed our neighborhood, transforming it back into the peaceful, welcoming place it was meant to be. And while I didn't seek recognition or praise, knowing that my actions had inspired others to find their voices filled me with a deep sense of fulfillment. In the weeks that followed, life returned to normal, or rather better than normal. Neighbors greeted each other warmly. Children played freely in the streets, and the sound of laughter echoed through the air once again. The HOA continued to exist, but under new leadership committed to fairness and transparency. As for me, I spent my days enjoying a retirement I had always dreamed of, with the American flag proudly waving outside my home, a reminder of the values I fought for and the justice we achieved together. This story carries several powerful messages that resonate deeply, especially for those who have lived through decades of life's challenges and triumphs. At its heart, it teaches us the importance of standing up for what is right, even when faced with adversity. As we grow older, it can be tempting to avoid conflict or remain silent in the face of injustice, fearing repercussions or believing our voices no longer matter. But this tale reminds us that courage knows no age limit. Whether defending a principle of profound as freedom or addressing smaller injustices in our daily lives, taking a stand can inspire others and create meaningful change. Another key lesson is the danger of unchecked authority and the misuse of power. Karen's downfall illustrates how toxic leadership, whether in a neighborhood, workplace, or community, can erode trust and divide people. For seniors who may have encountered controlling figures throughout their lives, this serves as a reminder to recognize such behavior early and address it collectively. There's strength in unity, and when individuals come together to challenge oppression, they can restore balance and fairness. This message encourages older adults to stay, engage in their communities, offering wisdom and guidance to younger generations while advocating for inclusivity and respect. Finally, the story underscores the enduring value of perseverance and resilience. Karen had spent years ruling the neighborhood through fear and intimidation, convinced that no one could challenge her. But when she came after me and my flag, she finally picked the wrong fight. The moment the law got involved, her false sense of power crumbled. The HOA turned against her, the neighbors found their voices, and the community took back its freedom. As for me, my flag still stands, waving proudly outside my home. And every time I see it, I remember this. Bullies like Karen only win when people stay silent. But when you stand your ground, justice always finds a way.